Good evening, everyone. I sound like a frog again. I'm sorry. I've tried everything, but I still can't get over it. Maybe David, it's the Lakota. Is there a Lakota sign or totem that's a frog and that's me?
I don't know it.
Well, in any case, I'm delighted tonight to be able to present to you a new author, David Weiden, who is wearing the unbelievably cool shirt with the skulls. Oh,
Thank you.
it's wonderful. And in conversation with David is our wonderful and longtime friend, William Kent Krueger, who I'm pleased to say has signed his every book here at the Poison Pen, and hopefully will return to us next year with his new book. So Kent, as you know, has won every mystery award, too tiresome if I detail them all, but we could say at least the Anthony and the Edgar Award and various other associated awards. I myself presented him with the Dulles Award back when that was an award for the Mystery Booksellers Association. Do you remember that, Kent? We were in Monterey, California.
I do, indeed I do. That's a night I will never forget, Barbara.
I was so mean, I looked at everyone else in the room. I figured he'd probably work it out towards the very end when I zeroed in on him. In any case, Kent writes, as you know, the Cork O'Connor series, and he's also written 3 standalones, 2 of which they're not sequels, but they're kind of related, and David is a new fan of This Tender Land. So we're going to talk about This Tender Land in addition to David's amazing book called Winter Counts, set on the Rosebud Reservation. David is an enrolled citizen of Sikangu Lakota Nation, received an MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. He's a McDowell Colony Fellow, a Tin House Scholar, and the recipient of the PEN's America Writing for Justice Fellowship. And this is his wonderful debut novel, which is our August Crime Book of the Month. So, I'm going to fade away and turn this over to Mr. Krueger.
Goodbye, Barbara.
Now I'm here, I'm just going to be quiet.
Well, David and I are going to begin talking even before you disappear there. David, what a pleasure this is. I was so pleased when Barbara asked me to be in conversation with you, and even more pleased when I finally received Winter Counts and read it. I just think it's a stunning debut. And I'm going to make some predictions here. I think you are going to get lots of award nominations as a result of this novel. I can't imagine that you won't. Well done. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, you know, let me say that the pleasure and the honor is mine, because this book, if there's anybody left who hasn't read it, you need to run, do not walk, and pick this up, because it is just simply a masterpiece. This is not hyperbole here. While reading this book, there were times that I laughed out loud. I guffawed in a burger place. Everybody thought I was crazy. There were times that I teared up. There were times that I was on the edge of my seat. This book, it's a journey. It's stunning. So really, the pleasure is all mine, and we'll get a chance to talk about it. But I mentioned this to you in a private communication. My own grandmother was at the Carlisle Industrial Indian School. And so to read and to have it dramatized in such a wonderful way, what it was like for these poor Native kids in these Native boarding schools, you just did a magnificent job. So again, it's my pleasure.
Boy, am I glad I'm in conversation with you. David, the first thing, before I talk about your work, I just want to say that you and I have a common touchstone in the past. And here it is. You are a professor at the Metropolitan State University in Denver.
Yes.
I took my very first creative writing class at what was then called Metropolitan State College in Denver 50 years ago. It worked.
I'm absolutely stunned, and I had no idea about this because it doesn't show up in in any of your biographies. And boy, am I going to run tomorrow virtually and tell the English department there what an illustrious alum they have. So Metro State. That is just crazy. That's wonderful.
I do. It was really a good experience for me, and I was pleased to see eminent people, eminent scholars on their staff, continuing to be on the staff there. Hey, so the first thing I'd like to do is for those people maybe in the audience who have really no idea about Winter Count, could you what would you like them to know about the novel?
Well, sure. So here's the final copy, which just came in. Author copies just came in a couple of days ago. For folks that haven't read anything about it, let me explain a little bit. So I am an enrolled citizen of the Sichangu Lakota Nation. Our reservation is in South Dakota. Now, I grew up in Denver, but I would spend summers on the reservation with my family, visiting relatives, going to powwows, spiritual ceremonies. So I spent a lot of time there, but it was a strange existence because I was a city kid, but I'd go back to the reservation. So that informs a lot of the book. Now, what is the setup to the book? The book is an examination of the broken criminal justice system on reservations. So again, there's no reason why most people would know this, but there's a fairly obscure law called the Major Crimes Act that was passed way back in 1885, which says that if a violent felony crime is committed on a reservation, Native nations have no authority to prosecute the crime on their own. They must call the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office and hand the case off to them. But the problem here is that the feds are declining about a third to one half of all cases. So child rape cases, assaults, murders, arson cases. These cases, the feds are letting these people go free, these offenders. That has led to a situation of real lawlessness on many reservations, and people are turning to private enforcers, vigilantes. So if somebody hurts your child or your sister or your mother, and you can't get justice, you might very well call up a guy like the hero of my book, Virgil Wounded Horse, who for a fee will go out and beat the heck out of whoever hurts your family member. So the book is the story of a hired vigilante and what he does to try and stop drugs from coming onto the reservation, as well as his own personal struggle to accept his Lakota identity. So I think that's probably enough of a setup.
It's I just can't tell everybody out there who's watching enough what a terrific read it is. Not only is it a compelling story, but it's such a stunning portrait of life on the reservation as it is today. The difficulty in really finding justice anywhere, the disparity that exists even among the people on the reservation themselves. And so, as I was enjoying the story and enjoying the crime, I was also finding myself being educated, enlightened, and I think a good story ought to do that. It ought to educate us. It ought to enlighten us about the situation on, certainly the Rosebud, but it's reflective of the situation on so many reservations. You're great characters, terrific characters in this novel. Chief among them, of course, the protagonist, Virgil Wounded Horse, who, have to tell you honestly, he could have slipped into cliche, and he didn't. And he didn't because you let us into who he was inside, why he behaved the way he was. You gave him just this beautiful backstory that explains so many things and tugged at our heartstrings as well. Now, I have read that Virgil Wounded Horse made his first appearance in a short story, and you offed him in that short story. Could you talk about that and why you brought Virgil Wounded Horse back?
That's right. Wow, I'm impressed that you found out about that. So Virgil Wounded Horse made his first appearance in a short story that I wrote when I was a student in the graduate program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. And so I wrote a short story there, and my classmates liked it. They thought it maybe was a little too violent. So I kept working on it. I was studying there with a crime writer named Dominic Stansberry, and he had me read a lot of the great crime writers during my semester that I studied with him. And so I'm really grateful to him because he forced me to read some of the classic crime writers that I had not read, and I was really blown away. So I turned the short story into more of a noir direction, and in the end, in the short story, which is published in Yellow Medicine Review 2014, he does die. because I thought the dramatic logic of this story required that he die, and especially of crime noir. But the story kind of stuck with me and the characters, and I just kept thinking, gosh, there's so much more that I haven't really explored with Virgil and his world. And so I decided to bring him back and see if I had the chops to actually write a novel. And then as I was writing it, I was like, I like this guy. I don't think I want to kill him off. I want to keep him around. And so I don't want to give away how the book ends, but let's just say there will be a sequel. So there you go.
Yeah, when I finished Winter Counts, I thought, I can't wait for the next installment in what I'm sure is going to become a long-running series. And if you don't go there, you're going to disappoint lots of us.
Well, you're most kind. What I can tell you for sure is that there will be another book. I'm outlining it right now. I'm working out the arcs. There'll be some new challenges, a couple of new characters coming in. And so, yeah, writing a series, writing the second book in a series, this is a whole new task that I'm learning about. But that manuscript will be delivered to Echo in about 10 months. And
Okay.
so I think, everything going well, and we can maybe get a handle on this pandemic, it should hit bookshelves maybe in a couple of years, I hope, knock on wood.
And then you can go on that long-awaited book tour.
I had one live event, the South Dakota Festival of Books said, we're going to bring you out, and I just heard last week it's been canceled. So there you go. It's all virtual, but it's all good.
Hey, do the South Dakota Festival of Books. It's a great festival.
I'd love to.
Yeah. So Virgil is a terrific protagonist around which you base so much, but you have a great cast of adjunct characters as well, and many of whom I'm hoping you're going to continue to bring back. Nathan Wounded Horse, Virgil's nephew, who plays such an important role in everything that happens, and in drawing Virgil in a personal way into what's going on with the drug trade. So, Nathan, you have Marie Shortbear?
That's right, yes.
Marie Shortbear. Marie Shortbear, you've got Tommy, you've got all of these characters who, when you bring them onto the page, they just stand out and they feel so real. And the thing I like about everything, all of the characters, is they're all struggling. They all have issues. They all have, well, they don't always know where they're going, but they know what they want to go somewhere. So could you talk about the creation of your adjunct characters? Did these come from people you know? Do they come from family members? Where do you draw your character portraits from?
Very much so. You mentioned Nathan Wounded Horse. So Nathan, for folks who haven't read the book yet, is the nephew of Virgil Wounded Horse. His sister has died, and so Virgil becomes the official guardian, a parent of sorts for Nathan. And Nathan is 14 in the book. I drew very much from my own children. So I am the proud father of a 13 and 15-year-old. And honestly, those chapters were some of the hardest ones to write, because to get at some emotional truthfulness, I had to bring in some of the feelings that I'd had with my own children. And I've written on this, and it's out there, so I don't mind sharing it. It's a little bit dark, but my younger son, Sasha, was, I'm sad to say, he's fine, but he was in the building at a school shooting just about a year and a half ago. So we had a school shooting out here in Colorado at, both of my boys go to what's known as STEM School, Highlands Ranch. And so my son, I get a call from my ex-wife screaming into the phone while I'm teaching, there's been a shooting at Sasha's school. We couldn't reach him on his cell phone. It was obviously every parent's nightmare.
Oh my God.
Oh, so he had to huddle in a closet. Two gunmen burst into his school, and he could hear the gunshots that killed this young man who's a hero, Kendrick Castillo. He rushed one of the gunmen, was able to disarm him, but took a bullet in the chest and died on the spot. I know, I don't mean to bring this to a down note, but I think it's important. Those feelings of terror that I had when I was rushing to go see my son, those are feelings that I tapped into when I was writing these chapters. And it was a difficult process, but I felt that I needed to go back to those feelings to write, hopefully, a worthwhile story. So those were rough. On On a happier note, thank you. I can see the looks of concern out there. It was a rough time. On a happier note, some of the other characters have been influenced by people I've known, or some I've just made up out of whole cloth. Marie is sort of a composite of people I've known in my life. Tommy, the same thing. The only one that I think I really directly model was Nathan, who is very much modeled after my 15-year-old son. He wants to be a rapper, and he's just he's deeply into teenagerhood right now. I'm teaching him to drive right now, and that's a whole other challenge. So anyway, so yeah, bringing in the side characters were a lot of fun. I'll give you a tidbit. I believe what's going to happen to Nathan in the next book is he's going to want to become an enforcer like his uncle. And he's going to struggle, but Virgil doesn't like this. And so I sense that, there's going to be some tension between the two of them. So there's just a little teaser for what I think is going to happen in the next book, in that arc.
You already have us salivating. Thank you. How about Jerome, who performs the Uwipi ceremony? Do you know an elder like Jerome?
I do. So I guess I misspoke.
Explain what we're talking about to those who are listening.
I will. I'd be happy to. So in the book, Jerome is a medicine man, or as we sometimes refer to them, a spiritual advisor. And Virgil Wounded Horse goes to Jerome for counsel and for some healing, even though Virgil is skeptical about Lakota customs. He rejects his Lakota identity, and that's one of the arcs of the book. Will he accept it? Will he go through that journey and accept Lakota spirituality and his Lakota identity? But Jerome is a medicine man, and yes, I will say that I was influenced by my own medicine man, who lives way out in Sioux Falls. He's just a wise person. Whenever I'm in his presence, I just feel, and I didn't want to write too much cliche, because I think it's easy to get into cliche here, and so I tried to give as much as I could Jerome his own life and idiosyncrasies as well. But I do have a spiritual advisor that I just have the utmost respect for, and of course my portrayal of Jerome was influenced by this person.
You did a great job with him. Didn't feel one iota of cliche with him. Well done.
Thank you.
You just touched on something. You touched on the arc of Virgil's journey. One of the things that I've so admired about this story is that it is, in fact, a journey for all of the characters involved. And I personally believe every good story ought to be a journey, and every character at the end of the story ought to be in a different place than they were in the beginning. And I don't want you to give away anything, but I so appreciated the journey of all of the characters involved. And how did you foresee the arc of the story before you began to write it? Did it reveal itself to you as you were writing, or in all of the revisions you probably did?
So that's a wonderful question, and I should point out too that I had the same thought when I read This Tender Land, how all of your characters in the book go through an arc at the end. We can probably return to that. So all of my characters' arcs were fairly well defined in my head, with the exception of Marie, Virgil's ex-girlfriend. They spark things up again as they engage upon their journey to Denver. So in an early draft, I revised this 18 times. 18 times.
I thought I revised a lot.
Not every revision was major. I took about 2 years to write it, but 18 times, and I did not feel in my early drafts that the character of Marie was really well defined. And these were some comments that I got from my beta readers and my partner, who's a writer. She's the writer, Erica Worth. And I worked very hard to develop her arc, her character, and her subplot. That was the one that I felt I really had to struggle with, just to give her own unique character. And so that's the one that I had to work out as I was writing.
Now, you are an enrolled member of, let's see, Chichangu?
Yes.
Lakota.
Yes.
But I'm imagining, because you live in two different worlds, and I garnered from your notes that you benefited from a great deal of research. Could you talk a little bit about the research that you had to do for the story?
Oh, sure, sure. So the research for the book was wide ranging, maybe not as much as yours. I read in your author's note that you were reading microfiche and archives, and for me, it was really going to the reservation and checking on slang and customs and Lakota words, because I am not a fluent Lakota speaker by any stretch. And so I would go back to the res and talk to a lot of my family still live there, some of my family still live there, and say, look, what is the slang, the proper slang term that would be used here? So it was a lot of that. And then I did go to Sinte Gleshka University, which is a tribal college on our reservation, and I had them go over the Lakota words, and they thankfully saved me from some really embarrassing errors. So I acknowledge them again. And then for the heroine subplot, I did a fair amount of research because I did not know anything about that. And Sam Quinones' book, Dreamland, is just a superb, wonderful nonfiction book. So yeah, so the research for me operated on several different planes. It was getting the knowledge, it was making sure that I had the rhythms of the speech right, the setting correct. Now, some of the setting in the book is just flat out made up, but a lot of it is real. And indeed, since I wrote the book, some of the places have closed. PJ's Pizza, which is a legendarily bad pizza restaurant on the reservation. I mean, bad really in a way that you can't even comprehend, okay? Now, it's now closed, so I can insult it all I want, okay? I mean, it possibly the worst pizza maybe on the planet. But it's one of 4 restaurants on the res, and it is now closed, so I would go there just to see, how much they charge for a slice. So the research was more experiential, I would say, rather than content-based, which it sounds like what you did a lot for the superb This Tender Land.
I haven't spent any time on the Rosebud Reservation, but I have traveled across Highway 20 just south of there in Nebraska.
Sure.
And spent a lot of time in Valentine. So I always appreciated when you took us to Valentine and going, oh yeah, that's Valentine.
That is another bit of sorrow for me. So Valentine, I spend a lot of time in Valentine because when I drive up from Denver, I stop in Valentine because it's right on the border of the Rosebud Reservation. And there was an Indian bar in Valentine, the Derby, and I loved it. It was a true native bar, and it closed down. And indeed, there's some scenes in there. I don't think I call it the Derby. I can't remember now. Maybe I did. But it is shut down, and so that's a real loss for Valentine. So that's fantastic that you know Valentine. It's a nice little town.
One of the questions I get, because in my Corporal Connor series, I deal significantly with the Ojibwe population, and I'm a white guy trespassing. I have no native heritage in me whatsoever. And so a question I'm always asked is, how does the Native community respond to your work? So I'm going to ask you the same thing. How does the Native community respond to your work?
Well, thank you for that wonderful question, and it's been a tremendously positive outpouring. Just today, a Lakota woman on Instagram posted a video stating how much she loved it. She said, "You guys don't know what this means to me. It's like, finally, I have some representation. I have somebody who's speaking in my voice, my language, my lands." She said, "You just don't know what this means to me." And I teared up a little bit, because this is what I'd been hoping for, that you never know how people are going to respond to your book, but I can tell you it's been uniformly positive. The Native community has just really rallied around me. They're doing a book club. There are like 4 or 5 Native book clubs out there. And so Winter Counts is the book of the month for 5 book clubs that specialize in Indigenous literature, and it's primarily Native readers and teachers. So I'm just really tremendously grateful to the Indigenous readership, the crime community, and the literary fiction community. It's just been such a wonderful response.
When I broke into the business many, many years ago, there weren't a lot. I'm trying to remember if there were any Native writers at all setting crime fiction. in Indian country.
Yeah, there was one, Ken, and I'm trying to remember. He's fallen into disrepute, but he wrote he's the guy up in Washington that, has incurred a lot of wrath. He wrote a serial killer book set. It'll come to me.
But David, you gave a shout out to a couple of authors I was not aware of that have influenced you. Can you remind me who they are?
I think in my afterword, I talked about possibly Susan Power and Joseph Marshall III. I think I gave a shout out in there, but I do want to point out, if listeners out there, watchers, are interested in indigenous crime writers, I actually have an article that I'm just finishing up later tonight that'll go out to Crime Reads, and I'm writing about it. So I would argue the most significant native crime writer ever he's passed on, Lewis Owens. So Lewis Owens wrote in the 1990s. He won some awards. He wrote Bone Game and Nightland. And look, I'm going to reveal something because you've been so great. There's a hidden tribute to Lewis Owens built into this book. So I put in a whole bunch of Easter eggs in here, and I put in Easter eggs to another crime writer that I won't reveal that. So real crime fans should be able to pick up. I built in, 2 hidden tributes, homages. But Lewis Owens, I would say, is the classic. There's a wonderful Ojib writer, Anishinaabe writer, Marcy Rendon, up where you live.
Oh, sure, Marcy Rendon.
Marcy is fantastic. She just won a big award a couple of days ago. Her series is fantastic. Murder on the, I forget, and Girl Gone Missing is the second one. They are great, and Marcy's a wonderful person. And then I'll give a final shout out to my buddy Stephen Graham Jones. Now, Stephen Graham Jones is blowing up right now for his indigenous horror, but he wrote a couple of crime books, and there's one that he wrote called All the Beautiful Sinners, back in 2003 with a press that is now out of business. And I've argued in other writings that this is really the seminal native crime novel, because I'm arguing in my Crime Reads article that there may be a unique indigenous literary style, and I think that it was pioneered by Lewis Owens and Stephen Graham Jones, and that is bringing in cultural critiques, political critiques, calls to action, and also bringing in elements of magical realism and surrealism in a way that some crime writers don't do. So I would say Stephen Graham Jones and Lewis Owens, those, I argue in my article, are 2 of the really important ones. But there are really a great and increasing number of native crime writers right now.
Yeah, increasing. That is sort of the direction I was heading. More and more we're seeing people writing out of their own culture rather than let's see, those of us who are Washichu.
You know it. That means white people, if you don't know it.
If you're willing, you in some of what I read up when I was doing my research about you, you have benefited from a number of writing programs. One of them taught by Ben Percy, fellow Minnesotan Ben Percy. Ben and I have done a number of events together. Ben talks like this.
Oh.
If I had been given something I didn't have by God, it would have been Ben Percy's voice. But could you talk about the benefit of having been involved in those kinds of programs for anybody out there who's wanting to be a writer, struggling to be a writer, and is trying to figure out how to go about that? Could you talk a little bit about that experience?
I'd love to, and let me just give a little, shout out to Ben Percy out there. Ben Percy is one of the great guys in this business, okay? Not only was he blessed with this deep, resonant, magnificent voice, but he's one of the good guys. He really is. He's a fantastic writer. He's written some great craft books. I'm going to use his book, Thrill Me, in a class I'm teaching next semester. But more than that, he's generous. In some ways, he's sort of been my mentor. He and I have stayed in touch. He blurbed me. He's given me professional advice. He's just been, for me, the model of how one handles a professional writing career. So I just can't say enough about Ben Percy. But to come back to your earlier question, so, if there are any emerging writers out there, so what I did is I started off at an MFA program called the Vermont College of Fine Arts. I took up writing somewhat later in life. I grew up fairly impoverished. I'm a first-generation college student. I went to the state school in Colorado. I became a lawyer because when you grow up poor, you don't ever want to be hungry again. And I thought that lawyers, that was a good job that nobody could fire you from. And so I do donate some legal time to some Native organizations around Colorado. I am a licensed attorney, and then I became a teacher. But I got an itch about 15 years ago, and I said, I need to write. This is something I've always wanted to do, but I never knew how to do it. Growing up in fairly rugged circumstances, I just didn't understand how you pursued a writing career. I didn't have any framework or reference point for understanding that. And so, again, in middle age, I started writing, and I entered the Vermont College of Fine Arts, which is a wonderful program. But then a new MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts opened up right in the middle of my other MFA, and I knew I had to go because there were all the superstar Native writers there. And so I did, in fact, transfer, and I got to work with some great people. But then I've taken part in some writing programs. I met Ben Percy at the Tin House Conference, which is superb. I've been fortunate enough to go to some writing residencies. I went to the MacDowell Colony, I guess they just call it MacDowell now, and where I met wonderful people, and Ragdale. And I've just been, really fortunate. And I went to another one called VONA, Voices of Our Nation. And I've just been lucky to have folks that, would take this fledgling writer and, show him the ropes. And so, that's what it's all about. And so now I'm doing the same. I'm a mentor now for the AWP for Indigenous writers. I just mentored a wonderful writer, Gretchen Potter, whom you're going to be hearing lots of stuff about. I'm blurbing writers for writers of blurbing novels for writers of color. So I'm trying to give back. So really, it's not just Ben Percy, but so many wonderful people have helped me, and I'm just so grateful.
You are really a fine writer. I mean, just a fine writer, period.
Thank you.
Why crime? Why do you write crime fiction?
Well, I love it. I love it. It's.
Me too.
We all do. I think if you're watching this, it's because you love the genre, and I think it's obviously it's the genre that brings in urgent political and social issues, and also just nail biters and page turners. So I love it. But I love really all genre. I grew up in a neighborhood so poor we didn't have a library anywhere near. So we had a bookmobile that would come, and every Friday I just load up with 10 books, and I'd take them home. And I'd read as many as I could in a week. And they were like Westerns and crime novels and everything. So I love genre. Now, in college, I read a lot of literary fiction. And I still love that. I love Updike and Cheever and all that. But my first love is a great tale, but a great tale that does more, that broadens, like this is a page turner. I know I keep flattering you, but I'm just so blown away by this book. But it does more than that. Obviously, it educates. It's got a message, and so this is a wonderful example of what I'm talking about, folks. So anyway, so I love crime, and it's just my first love. Now I do have a children's book that I wrote about Spotted Tail, about the great leader of my nation, and I have a handful of essays out there. I wrote an essay in the New York Times a month ago, and I have an essay about my grandmother's time at the Carlisle Indian School in the journal Shenandoah. But I'm never going to leave crime fiction. It's my love, and that's where we're at.
Wow.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I was just going to say, I have a huge time sink coming up for you, David, because you have read This Tender Land, but you have not, I presume, yet read the Cork O'Connor series that Kent has written, all of which are magnificent, all of which are different. You will be transported. He also wrote an earlier book called Ordinary Grace, which is the one that This Tender Land is not a sequel to, but is an amazing book as well. But I think if you reach your way from Iron Lake forward, you will learn. It'll be like an entire college course for you, all over again, just to read Kent's work, because it's truly spectacular. And I feel really lucky that he and I have been together for his entire career, because it's just.
Oh, Barbara, you have always been so supportive, not just of me, but of all of the authors in our community.
Well, I'm not supportive of bad writing. Come on. I mean, fortunately, there's more good writing than bad writing, but I've always been, willing to follow a good writer anywhere. And I did remember it's Sherman Alexie who I was trying to think of that wrote a crime novel with a Native American background and
okay.
wandered off into to other stuff. That's the horror of old age is you know it, but it takes a while for your memory to sort of churn through the retrieval system and come up. While you were talking, I was thinking here in Phoenix, the street directly over here, the main traffic artery that goes east-west across Phoenix is called Indian School Road. And we had a huge Indian school here. J.H. Ince wrote a book, I think her very best book ever, called Hour of the Hunter, which described what it was like for Indian children to be forcibly removed from their families and bussed up here to Phoenix and to go to that school. It's no longer functioning. And I keep waiting for, in this new activist age, for somebody to want to change the name of the road. But we'll see. We are also right on the edge of the Pima Reservation. I mean, in Scottsdale, it's, right on, in fact, the freeway is leased on Pima land. And we often have interesting jurisdictional things between the Pima and the Scottsdale or the other police. There was one notable car chase where it was a total clusterfuck because, the reservation lines were here and the native police and were all, it was just a mess. And I hadn't really thought about the crime, the jurisdictional issue of the local or the tribal court versus federal court. And there is some here versus the civil courts. But Kent, when you wrote, because you do one O'Connor very much on a reservation, I think it's called Red Knife, do I remember the name right?
Yeah.
What kind of research did you do? Because is that an Ojibwa reservation? I have read it so long ago, I'm sorry, I'm just blanking out.
Well, David, you talked about the tragedy of the shooting in your son's school in Minnesota, almost 20 years ago now, good 15 years ago. We had what, up to that point in time, was the worst school shooting in the nation's history on the Red Lake Reservation, at the high school on the Red Lake Reservation. And I wrote a novel as a result of that tragedy. And I tried not to use that tragedy itself, but use the direction it got me going in terms of my thinking, which is simply this: why are we such a violent nation? Why are we such a violent people? Why are we such a violent culture? And I firmly believe that even though we're not willing to admit it, we pass down violence as a cultural norm one generation to the next. And so I used Red Knife to explore that issue. I didn't come up with any wisdom, I think, as a result of it. But just as you say, one of the things that I love about crime fiction is that in addition to giving a really good story with usually a very clear beginning and a clear middle and a clear end, which literary fiction sometimes doesn't deliver, crime fiction can also tackle important issues, important social issues, and you do exactly that with Winter Counts.
Patrick, do you have anything that you would like to contribute? Sorry, I'm attracting Patrick back over here because he's reading the Facebook comments.
I'm listening too.
Before Patrick contributes, I have a question for you, David.
Sure.
Your mother or your grandmother attended Carlisle.
You did.
Was forced to attend Carlisle?
Well, therein is a complicated tale, and I know we only have so much money, or so much time. They didn't have any money, and so she was 20, which sounds weird because that seems old to go to a native boarding school. But in those days, if you didn't have any cash and no way to feed your children, even if they were somewhat older than we normally think of, you would send them off to a boarding school. So she was 20 when she went. Now, she wasn't snatched the way that some 6- and 7-year-olds were, but it's my understanding from the historical research I've done into my family that I guess this would be my great-grandfather had died, and so my great-grandmother had like 8 children and no way to feed them. And so off my grandmother goes to the Carlisle Indian School. And now, therein is the tale. I found these letters from her. I wrote to the Library of Congress, and I got her historical records. And she had written letters praising the school, and I was kind of horrified by these, and I kept this as a deep secret in my life. I didn't tell anybody because I wanted her to be like some of the characters in your book, Kent, that were fighting, and but she had praised the school. So about 2 years ago, I started doing some more research, and I found out that this was part of the brainwashing that they did, the indoctrination.
Yeah.
And the more deeply that I got into it, I realized that she was sort of indoctrinated into this, but throughout her life, she was working to reclaim her Native identity from what had been forced upon her at the Carlisle Indian School. And indeed, if anybody out there is interested at all, go to the journal Shenandoah, where you can read letters from my grandmother praising the Carlisle Indian School, and see how horrified I was by this, until I said, look, I need to discover her own truth and stop trying to impose my narrative on it. So it was quite a journey that I took myself.
Good for you.
Patrick.
Yep. Okay, let's see here. I have a question from a lady named Catherine, who asks simply, what do you hope readers will take away from Winter Counts?
Sure, I'd be delighted to answer that. And thank you for the wonderful question. What I hope readers take away is obviously just a good page turner. I hope it's one of these books that you're glued to and you can't wait to get back to, and a gripping, rousing tale.
It is.
Thank you. So I hope they get that. But I hope that, as a side note, I hope people sort of understand what it's like to live on a reservation and some of the issues that we have. So, for example, the healthcare system on Native reservations is terrible. We have something called the IHS, the Indian Health Service, and it's not a good system. The average life expectancy for a man on my reservation, a male, is 47 years old. 47. That contrasts with, I think, in general American society, I think it's 78 or 80. That shows you that we have a problem with our healthcare. We also have a problem with the food supply. It's difficult to get good, healthy, and sustainable food on reservations. We often have to subsist on what are called commodities. And so a lot of people don't know about this stuff. And I hope by reading it, but I didn't want to beat people over the head with it, but I hope after you read the book, you're like, oh, so this is why there is bad healthcare on the reservation. This is why they don't have good food. This is what's going on. So I hope that they take that away, both the sense of life on a reservation and some of the issues. But finally, I'll say this, I hope that people take away the joy, the resilience, the good humor of Native people. Because it's easy to just be like, oh, Native people, we have poverty problems at times, and some of us have maybe a substance abuse problem, and most of us don't, and there are lots of problems. But I think that overlooks the beauty and the joy of the Native experience. And I know I keep coming back to your book, but I felt that come through so clearly. You talked about the Dakota 38, for which I thank you, sir. But you also showed there was such a positive role model with the Lakota man who comes and helps mows. I just thought it was such a positive portrayal. And I just think that's important to depict Native people in all of our facets. So I really hope readers will take that away with them.
One of my favorite characters in the book was Tommy. I just loved his spirit.
Tommy is sort of a jester. I had more fun in Winter Counts writing the character Tommy than anyone else, because he's sort of a composite of lots of crazy people I know, and just lots of stuff that happens on the reservation. Like, there actually was a guy, there's a restaurant in there, I just have a throwaway that he would use in the dishwashing station. He'd use the power hose to hose off his parts, and and just there's lots of there's just lots of crazy stuff that happens. A reservation is like a really small town where everybody knows everybody's business. So Tommy knows everyone, and he's just funny and crazy and wild and proud of being Native. So I had a lot of fun with him. So thank you, Kent.
Actually, David, I have a question for you. I'm sure you're familiar with the writer James Welch. Do you know his stuff? He wrote The Indian Lawyer and
yes.
Winter in the Blood.
Yeah, Winter in the Blood, right. And I think that The Death of Jim Loney is a great noir novel, at its heart. We read it for our hard-boiled discussion group here.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see here. Did you have, let me see. Yes. I've had a couple different questions about what was the most difficult part of writing this book? Was there anything you can put your finger on?
Sure, and I'll just say that James Welch is probably a hero to every native writer out there. You can't see it, but were I to pan the camera over, I actually spent a little bit of my advance. I have a first edition of Winter in the Blood, an actual first edition. You know, it was like one of the rare things I splurged upon when I signed a 2-book deal with HarperCollins. I've been wanting this for years, and I have it. It's really one of my prized possessions. But to come back to the great question from a viewer, I think I touched on this earlier. The toughest part for me to write really were the parts with Nathan, the 14-year-old, because it tapped into my own fears. Being a parent is to be in a state of constant fear. Are my kids going to be hurt? Am I doing enough for them? Am I setting a good role model? Am I being a good role model? Am I setting a good example? And these are feelings that I think a lot of us that are parents, we push them down, but they bubble up a lot. And I guess even when your kids are older, you still have these fears. And so I had them just come right up to the surface, and it was honestly just very tough to write. And I had to take a lot of breaks when I was writing those scenes. I don't want to give too much away, but Nathan gets into a lot of trouble in the book. Yeah. So.
Just another question, this is actually for me again, which is, are you familiar with the writer David Joy, contemporary mystery writer?
Yes, I hear he's fantastic. I hear his new book just came out. All of my friends whom I share a taste with are raving about it. And, launching a book is kind of crazy, but when I get to, get back to normal life again, that is at the top of my list. That and The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. So that's another book that I'm planning to read. But yeah, David Joy, I've heard fantastic things, but I have to be honest, I have not read any of that. I read a lot in that genre. I love Daniel Woodrell, Frank Bill. All of these are just great writers. I should give a plug to a buddy of mine, Wesley Brown. He is, I think, buddies with David Joy. He has a book that just came out in West Virginia University Press, Hillbilly Hustle, and it's great. I workshop with him at Tin House. So, folks, it's not on a big press, but it's great. And if you like David Joy, you're going to like his buddy Wesley Brown, Hillbilly Hustle.
I bring up David Joy for a reason. In his new book, he talks about, he's writing about Appalachia, in particular, a particular part of Appalachia, and that culture is in decline. It's falling away. It's vanishing. Yet the Cherokee are undergoing this kind of unexpected and really nice revitalization of their culture, and there's an embrace of the language, learning the language again, and you're seeing some of that out here in the Southwest too, which is really great to see, which are the emphasis put on learning the language before it slips away. Are you seeing that all over the place?
Yeah, that's a big thing in Lakota country. There are a number of schools that have shot up, Lakota immersion schools, where they send a kid in there and they don't speak any English. That is very much happening. I think I may even briefly mention it in the book. I think I have an internal monologue where Virgil says, why are they always showing the poverty porn? Why don't they ever focus on some of the good things happening, the businesses, the language revitalization efforts and the culture efforts? That is very much a big thing in Lakota country right now, and I'm a huge supporter of it. And I feel guilty when I say this though, because I've taken probably more Lakota language courses online than I can speak Lakota words. I'm really bad with languages. I just am. So I have like a kindergarten vocabulary in Lakota, but I've tried, and I'm going to try again. So I promise.
Well, I could say two things. One of which is it's not just here in America, but it's interesting that Welsh is reviving, is being taught in the UK again, and Ireland has gone back to very much to the old language as well as Western Scotland. So I think that efforts to suppress language and culture in terms of a larger union are receding. I also want to give a shout out to Patrick, who did an absolutely brilliant interview with David Joy in the middle of last week, and you can either watch it as one of our videos or you can listen to it as a podcast, which is sort of nice if you're out doing something else. You can just download it if you go to our podcast page. I thought Patrick did an exceptional job, as he always does. And the other one I could recommend you listen to, which Patrick also did, is the last 20 minutes of his interview with James Lee Burke, which would just rock you, because Jim talks about his influences, his literary antecedents. Seeing Patrick just completely geek out over, and it's amazing. I've never heard Jim talk like that.
His poetry teacher was John Neihart, the author of Black Elk Speaks and Cycle of the West. And so, yeah, we nerded out on that for a long time.
It was wonderful. So, fortunately, we have a lot of good people here at the Poison Pen, so, it all works out. Gentlemen, this has really been wonderful. Is there any last word? I also forgot to mention that this is the debut of David's amazing skull shirt, which he bought to go on tour, and which I sincerely hope he's going to preserve in his closet until he's let out again. All right, Ken, any last thing you'd like to say?
I just want everybody out there to remember, I said it first, Winter Counts is going to be up for every major award.
And David?
Thank you. You're most kind, sir. And I just want to give a shout out to Poison Pen, to Kent, and really to the entire crime fiction community, because, people have just rallied around this book. I wasn't sure how much interest there was going to be in a crime novel set on a native reservation. And so, and written in a, it's fairly violent at times, and just the reception that I've received, I'm just very, very grateful, and I can't thank you all enough. So again, thank you.
So I forgot, as I often do, the commercial part of this whole program, which is to say that David has very kindly signed multiple copies of Winter Counts. They are on their way to us as we speak. They should be here midweek. It is our August crime book of the month, but we do have some spare copies. And I agree with Kent, so I would urge you to buy it now, because signed first editions will be hard to come by and probably valuable, just in the way that Iron Lake was one of our real successes way back in the day. How long ago was it, Kent, that you published Iron Lake?
1998, which makes it what, 21 years?
Wow.
22 years? I'm not a good mathematician. 22 years ago.
I'm looking up, in fact, of a photograph hanging over the TV set of you on your very first appearance here at the Poison Pen.
Stacks of
I
first.
still had hair then, didn't I? And my beard was kind of brown.
I wasn't going to mention the hair, but Patrick points out there are huge stacks of Iron Lake behind you. So it's been a wonderful journey. And David, one of the great things about our store is that we have walked the whole careers of so many great writers, caught them at the very beginning, and have stuck with them. So you're our newest opportunity.
Well, again, thank you. I'm just so grateful you reached out to me, and I thank every reader out there, and it's just it's just my honor.
Well, I want to thank both of you. Ken, thank you for joining us, and David, congratulations, and thank you as well. And good evening to all of you, and we certainly appreciate your spending some time with us this evening. If you want to recommend the program to your friends, that would be great. You can listen to it on a podcast. That's all I have to say. Good night.